thanks for having me. I'm Sebastian. I think this is my second time presenting, and I want to show you Runme Notebooks, and specifically Runme Notebooks now with Dagger Shell support natively built in. But before we do that, let me just kind of like introduce you or reintroduce you to Runme Notebooks. So the way I am running them right now is I actually switched over to Cursor, but Cursor is what I call a VS clone or a VS Code clone. So the way Runme is built, it runs basically on the VS Code platform. So if you use Cursor, Windsurf, Codespaces, any of those, they all work the same because they're all extension compatible. And that's what Runme on the notebook side is. So so instead of having slides, I just use notebooks, and I figured it's a good way to introduce myself. So again, my name is Sebastian. I think on the agenda it's at my my maiden name.
Yes,
which is,
sorry, I meant to ping you about that yesterday, and
that's okay.
But okay. Yes, noted now.
The Social Security Administration sent me a new Social Security card as of a month ago. So we're still in the transition phase.
Perfect.
But I couldn't deny the last name because of this iconic movie called Tombstone. If you haven't seen it, it's very cool. And there's the iconic line, "I'm your Huckleberry," and I can say that now.
Yeah.
Truthfully and legally too. If you don't know what that is, it's a great movie from 1993. It's probably my favorite Western now. I mean, how can it not be my favorite Western now that has my name in it?
Right.
And this also kind of showcases really quick what you can do with a notebook, right? I mean, I'm just running curl here. And instead of getting like a blob of binary, I actually get the image. And it's really big because I zoomed in, but you guys get the point. A thing that I can also do, and this is like less satisfying, is like I can actually look at the binary gibberish, which sometimes screws up your terminal, so you shouldn't really do that. But this is kind of like what would happen if you ran it and you authorized curl to like garble your terminal. But in the notebook, you get a nice representation of it. So yeah, quickly, what's Runme? Open source, Apache 2 licensed. As of also a month ago, so my name change and this admission to the CNCF occurred at the same time. It got admitted to the sandbox stage at the CNCF, which is really cool. Okay. And we're working to obviously make our way through, a fully, I think, graduated project down the road. Just to kind of show you a little bit more functionality of the notebooks, is like you can run arbitrary code. In this case, this is JavaScript. And again, it renders a really, really big sort of cubicle logo of Runme. But what Runme can also do is like it makes documentation interactive. And because this is too large, I kind of, when you like squint a little bit, you can see it. I put a little ratio in here. And what Runme lets you do is like, it lets you write interactive documentation where you can also have prompts. Environment variables aren't always prompting. I think for whatever reason, the screen sharing interferes with my cursor, interestingly. That's weird. Oh. But, yeah, that's definitely the screen sharing. Anyway, so the way this usually works, and we're going to have to skip over it, unfortunately, but, I could rerun it and then resize it, right? So when I ran this, it would be smaller, but we're going to have to skip over it. Cool. So
people need to imagine. They need to imagine a little bit.
Which is always unsatisfying. I don't fully understand. I literally tested all this before I got on the call, but I have seen that screen sharing interferes with this stuff before. So yeah, imagine it. So let's get into the Dagger support, right? I think the last time I was on here, I did demo the Dagger integration, and you can probably maybe remember that. What we've done more recently, or like I think this must have been almost a year ago now, made this sort of like UI level integration where we render like a UI on top of the existing notebook that is more, that is essentially giving you contextual help so you can kind of traverse the graph, right? That exists inside of Dagger. So if you get a directory, it'll let you, kind of like get extra controls that, for example, export the directory and all that, right? But it is in a lot of ways like a UI level, addition that augments your CLI experience, right? So while this is kind of cool, the grievance, or like grievance maybe like an overstatement, but the thing that like it's been difficult with Dagger Call is like it's very verbose, right? And so I've been delighted to see when Solomon showed me the shell, right? And like since I have been using the shell, I've weirdly unlearned how to use Dagger Call. I literally cannot write it anymore. Like when I try to, I always like revert back to the shell now, which is like I think my muscle memory got rewired. But
Nice.
essentially, what you can see up here, you know, is the same thing down here, but now it's Dagger Shell. And when you run it under the hood, it will know how to run it. And like with a single cell, that's not quite as exciting, because at the end of the day, it's just a shell interpreter, right? So it's the notebook really just passes what's in the cell inside of the interpreter. But what's really cool is when you essentially have multiple artifacts that are being built as part of a pipeline, you can now, you know, decompose them in multiple cells. And this is what I'm showing here. So this is the canonical example that actually Solomon and I worked through, and I keep using to demonstrate it because it's kind of concise. So what this notebook here does, essentially, it'll let you build the extension that's currently running inside of Cursor. And the way it does that is like it needs multiple artifacts, right? Before I do that, let me quickly show you guys, because there's a new extension on here, and it's called .dag. I kind of made that up, like Dagger, DAG. And when you create a new file that essentially has the DAG extension, like test.dag, what Runme will now do is like it immediately seeds your Markdown document, because I maybe should have mentioned that. Any notebook just serializes down to Markdown at the end of the day, right? So when you use a Markdown viewer, it's essentially just plain vanilla old Markdown, and it renders nicely in GitHub or any of these hosted repository source code control systems. So when you now create a .dag file, it will immediately assume that you want to do Dagger Shell, right? So you can overwrite that still, right? You can still, you know, layer in JavaScript or Python or like any kind of code snippets, but it will, whenever there's shell, it will always assume it's Dagger Shell, right? So the idea here then is fairly simple. You know, you build an artifact. In this case, I'm building the kernel binary. So the way Runme works under the hood, there is something called a kernel that, you know, you can't really see, but it's running in the background. This enables Runme to have multiple UIs, one of which is the notebook UI. And as you can see here now, it builds this kernel, right, based on this little Dagger Shell snippet, right? The interesting thing here is like you can give cells names, right? In this case, this is called kernel binary. And when it's serialized down to Markdown, let's maybe do the preview again, so it's a little bit easier to discern. We also drop a comment into the cell, because unless you're in the notebook UI, you can't really see that the cell is called kernel binary, and it might be a little confusing. But this is essentially what a non-Runme user would see if they're rendering it, or obviously if you look at the vanilla Markdown, there are some annotations here, they're not new. These IDs you can get away without, but this is how you identify a cell, right? So moving on to show you the magic. So we need two artifacts that essentially, you know, like are rolled up in the stack to build the extension. And the last step here does exactly that. So what I just did is I grabbed this pre-setup shell script, which is really just a sort of like a script that runs on top of a container, just install a bunch of stuff, because I didn't want to maintain a separate container image. And it has a name too. It's just called pre-setup, right? Which is configured here. And the cool thing now is using the Dagger Shell, I can reference these artifacts in other cells, right? So the way I do this is like using shell expression syntax, and essentially just drop the names in, right? And now when I run this, under the hood, you know, like Runme will stitch together a custom Dagger Shell script that essentially is valid and will run. And as you can see now, we'll do exactly that. Hopefully it won't take very long because I ran this ahead of time. So those two things seem to be cached, which makes sense because we just built them. And it might have to go through the whole npm, you know, like install webpack build run, but it shouldn't take very long. The other cool thing is since Runme and Dagger both understand environment variables, I put a GitHub token into my environment, and as of late, Runme supports what's it called, dir-env. So I don't have to put any clear text secrets in here. I'm just grabbing this from the GitHub shell, sorry, GitHub CLI, when I create my session. So in my store, I do have a secret, which I'm not going to show you. It's hidden, but it's valid. And when I'm using it in here, the DAG sort of extends out into, the notebook cells, but also into the environment. And you can also see how in the environment here, where the source of, in this case, like a environment variable that we are creating when a cell executes, and all sorts of different secrets and environment variables. You can use .env or .envrc, and it will support all of that. Let's see, this should be fairly close. This usually takes about 2 minutes ish.
But this is huge, Sebastian. Like the ability to run essentially what you created, these sub shells, and run them in separate cells of your notebook, preview them, play with them. Once you get them ready, just have a name and have it all just get stitched up in another cell. A super powerful way to build. I love it.
Right, and the other thing is we have these integrations where sort of for convenience, right? If you work in a repo, if they're named, there's different ways to get hold of them without having to traverse into notebooks and find them. So we can use this little launcher down here. You can turn off unnamed or only named cells, and let's imagine you hop into a new repo and you're just kind of looking for the top level, what builds my artifact, what tests it, what runs it, what deploys it. There's a really easy way to expose that and make the UX very streamlined. Even though the DAG might allow you to do all sorts of other things, you can almost kind of define the beaten path here. So yes, that's sort of the idea behind it. So yeah, the artifact built, and let's see. I'm not exporting it. So I could obviously do the whole thing where I'm exporting it. You can obviously do anything that you can do in Dagger Shell. The one thing that currently is not supported yet, that's something I'm working on, is currently it doesn't use a persistent shell session. So there's a little bit of a performance is not the right word here, a little penalty, because it essentially can only use the cache. If we have a long running shell session similar to what you would do with Dagger Shell, right, this would probably be almost instantaneous, right? And that's something that we want to get to. That's sort of on the roadmap.
I love it. Well, yeah, and speaking of features, I don't know if you saw Solomon's question flash by. Have you explored prototyping Dagger AI agents with this as well?
I've done that actually yesterday, and I've been toying around whether I should present something, but then I kind of ran a little short on time. But I do want to kind of because there's a lot of interactivity in there, right? So I kind of want to bring those two things together for sure. But limited experience of the last 12 hours, I would say.
And another question is the Dagger Runme, would it wrap in a common Dagger session?
Well, yeah. So that was kind of what I just tried to explain. Is it doesn't do that yet, but that's something I want to get to. So that first of all, you get the performance benefit of not just using the cache, but actually a persistent session, and to bring the UI integration back. So currently, the cells are being executed atomically, and that also means it spins up a dedicated Dagger Shell process. One thing that let's see, this should work. Yes. That you can also do is you can actually take a look at the raw script that's being run. So in the notebook UI, there's this concept of different renderers. And this is essentially a terminal, right? But I can also look at the underlying script that runs based on traversing the, not traversing the graph, but grabbing all of the cells, and it's being rendered into a shell script. And this is actually what's being run, right? And as you can see here, these have names. If they were unnamed, they would just have an ID, right? That is private. It's not really important, but it will work anyways. And you can kind of see how, it stitches that back together. And this is just shell, right? And that's really what's going on under the hood. One other interesting thing to note is like, this will also work on the CLI. So you can essentially use not just the notebook UI, but once the notebook is an artifact and it's just in your repo, and you don't want to like every time you want to, I'm just using this project here to like thin out because it's like inside of a larger repo, to just use the context directory. But what it lets you essentially do is, if you're a power user and you're like, hey, I just want to build my extension, or let's say my kernel binary, right? You can just run something like this, right? And we'll do the exact same thing. So it's sort of running the notebook headlessly, right? But it does the exact same thing, has the exact same execution path. It will reuse your session, your Runme session, which means it will also inherit your environment variables, right? Nice. So there's also a way here to use all of this without using the notebook. And technically, you could just run this in your CI if you wanted to, right? And that's kind of like all of it. I can't really see any questions, but I'm happy to answer more.
No, I was looking at it. We got the questions that came through, which is awesome. I also want to just say thank you so much for always staying up to date with all of our Dagger stuff. Like it's awesome to know when people are trying out Runme and they're trying out all these different combinations with Dagger with your tooling. It's usually the most up to date, with what Dagger can do. So
yeah, it sounds like.
Well, thanks to you guys.
Oh yeah, well, hey, anytime, and it sounds like there's a lot of great stuff ahead with both with the CNCF, and as well, we'll have to probably have you back, Sebastian, because since you're working on more features to make this even better, I can see a future episode.
Yeah, I'm definitely always down to come back, and thanks for building this. This is a little bit of a dream come true for me, and like I think. Solomon kind of like got me off the Dagger call train, which I also appreciate, and he gave me an early preview, because what I always really wanted was being able to use multiple cells and kind of decompose my pipeline so I can build the kernel separately, all these artifacts, because like everyone knows how that usually goes with like pipelines. They run for like, even if they just run for 5 minutes and they fail 4.5 minutes in, right? And then I kind of don't want to go back and type it all out. I just want to be able to like say, hey, give me all these partial artifacts. And then, like I can kind of like, it's much easier to debug. It's much easier to reason about. So like being able to like pass it into this expression syntax here is like a dream come true for me. So thanks, to you guys. And I'm happy there's a way to like bring these things together. And I'm definitely looking forward to play around with the agents and the LLM stuff. So,
well, and you're, as Solomon says here, you're probably already ready to go. You're just kind of waiting on us now. We're going to be, we're going to be seeing the LLM type in the main line of Dagger very, very soon. Of course, people are experimenting now, but it should probably just work. And I think marrying together this kind of familiar notebook format, but with these powerful features that you guys have with Runme, I think it's going to be a huge for all kinds of folks who are both new to the notebook world and also who are old hands at notebooks coming from the AI and ML side. So very excited to see how that goes.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, I will report back.
Awesome. And like we were saying early in the call too, if you aren't already following us on all of the socials, and if you aren't in our Discord, like jump in if you're watching this right now, because we have some stuff dropping next week to talk about Dagger Shell more. So if you haven't tried already and you are getting started today and trying out Dagger Shell and you have feedback, please let us know in Discord or GitHub issues, because we're working on the final touches right now. So I would love any and all feedback. And Sebastian, if they want to go try this out, what's the best next steps for them to do?
Honestly, really easy, runme.dev, install it. You can either install the binary first or the extension, or vice versa. And then, the easiest way, honestly, is just go in here, new file, put the .dak at the end, and then, you're off to the races, right? You can just do git. I actually kind of prepped another thing here, but I kind of got sidetracked. you know, but I can do this real quick. You know, you can just get started, right? There's,
Awesome.
you know, you could do .help, right, and then just run it.
We're big
That's
fans
it.
of
Yeah.
just one more demo.
No, I don't want to use up more time, but you know, I could go on forever.
Yeah, no, this is great, Sebastian, and I'll put the link for Runme in the chat as well. And then yeah, if
and I'm also on the Dagger Discord, so if you want to try it, you run into problems. I've noticed that I'm not really that we're not really you know, good at like forcing you to use Bash compatible cell names. There's like a couple of like little nitty you know, final polish, but like let me know. I'm on the Dagger Discord. Sourish Crowd is my handle. You know, feel free to ping me.